Imagine a world where death is not a door but a turnstile, one that grants exactly one return trip, not an endless carousel, not an infinite ladder of karma. One, verified in lab reports, ratified in law, prayed over in temples, debated in parliaments, a single bankable rebirth, selectable by the dying within narrow constraints, a range of years, a region, and a general kind of circumstance. No guarantees for wealth, no trading of slots, no cheating the system. You take your ticket, and you come back, once, and then the universe goes quiet again. On the morning the proof broke, hospitals silenced heart monitors and listened for something else. A faint, measurable signal, the continuity echo, leaving each brain at death, angled not toward heaven, but toward probability. The news anchors said it was like selecting a landing strip in a storm. You could choose the city, not the gate, the decade, not the day. Everyone would get exactly one do-over. Economists called it the end of actuarial certainty. Clerics called it the beginning of moral clarity. Politicians called for a registry. Families called each other. Because in a world where you only get one return, every first life suddenly matters more. Every goodbye gets heavier, and love chooses a new grammar for time. The first institution to form was not a church, not a market, and certainly not a company. It was a ledger. Governments called it the Reincarnation Registry, but people nicknamed it the Book of Nexts. On your 18th birthday, you gained the legal right to record your general preferences, a return window of 20 years, a geographic arc no smaller than a country, and a circumstance vector, 3 adjectives forced by statute to keep it intelligible: safe, urban, creative; rugged, communal, coastal; stable, scientific, democratic. The law didn't allow rich or famous. The system had limits. You could not pick the exact parents. You could not pick your exact hour. And none of it worked until your brain's continuity echo shut off the lights. The registry's waiting room was the strangest public space on Earth. Teenagers sat next to octogenarians comparing adjectives as if trying on futures. The walls were an encyclopedia of consequence. Posters warned, "One ticket. No transfers. Use it late, live it long. Don't spend it angry." Behind the counters, clerks printed crisp, legally binding acknowledgments that would sleep in digital vaults until a doctor's signature and a machine's measurement summoned them. On a spring afternoon in Tunis, Amina Al-Hadi, 82, asked the clerk to help her spell intergenerational. Her fingers shook as she held the stylus. She had watched revolutions wave through her city and recede, watched her daughter emigrate to Marseille, watched her granddaughter, Sana, grow up on screen more than in her lap. Amina had already scheduled her life's ending the way farmers schedule harvests. Not the day itself, but the pattern, the readiness. She chose her return window as 2095 to 2115, geographic arc, North Africa, and circumstance vector, stable, equitable, intergenerational. Not rich, not famous, just a chance to live in a century that might finally treat her region the way its poets suggested it deserved. Before the clerk clicked submit, Amina stared at the third adjective, intergenerational. She didn't mean child care collectives or family courts. She meant living long enough to be the old woman who finally gets to hold her granddaughter's granddaughter without a passport between them. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, insurance companies redrafted the mathematics of risk. Premiums adjusted not only for how likely you were to die, but for how likely you were to return soon. Second chance bonds appeared, paying out if you deliberately delayed your comeback beyond 80 years, a social nudge to keep the near future from flooding with boomerang babies. Universities created one-turn economics. Police academies taught ticket respect protocols. When you intervened in a violent dispute, you didn't just ask, "Are you armed?" You asked, "Have you burned your second life yet?" Some officers wore small pins shaped like a looped arrow with a slash through it. Spent. They were treated with a mix of reverence and suspicion, like monks who had taken a vow they could no longer undo. Religion fractured and, unexpectedly, healed. Denominations that once defined themselves by what comes after death now hosted workshops on what comes after. The Catholic Church convened a synod and, in a luminous compromise, framed the one return as a sacramental stewardship, neither to be used trivially nor hoarded fearfully. Sufi orders, long at home in the language of cycles, wrote poems that went viral. One line appeared on billboards: "Since love returns, let love be the reason it must." But the registry changed politics most. Legislators who once thought only in election cycles now argued in grandchild arcs. Infrastructure budgets stretched across multiple human lifetimes with the psychological anchor of return. Citizenship by second birth bills surfaced. Countries negotiated return accords that capped inbound second lifers to avoid demographic whiplash. Nationalists tried to force native returns, but the Continuity Agency, an international body that arose almost by accident, ruled that the echo responded most strongly to intention and probability, not to passports. Attempts to geofence souls failed on first contact with physics. Still, the most profound change happened in kitchens and hospital rooms, not parliaments. Dying became a negotiation, and for many, a peace treaty. People rehearsed their choices the way couples used to rehearse birth plans. "Promise me you won't use it to chase money," a wife would say. "Promise me you won't use it for revenge," a husband would answer. Therapists learned to translate "I can't go on" into "don't spend it now." Because there were rules. If you chose to return within 5 years, your particulars were fuzzier. Your adjectives had less pull, because the probability space was crowded. If you pushed your window far out, the universe could meet you more precisely. The moral, social, and statistical calculus braided together like DNA. A viral story shaped public imagination. A paramedic in São Paulo, her name on the news obscured at first, later revealed as Julia, faced a collapsed viaduct with 15 trapped commuters. The river below was a rusted mirror. The van she could reach first was about to slide. She had one harness and an instant to decide. She unclipped. She ran. She got 2 people out. The van shifted. She dove back anyway. The city watched the footage in slow motion at dinner tables, in subway cars, in churches. When she died, her digital will and registry record unlocked. She had chosen to return in 2150 to 2170. Geographic arc, Amazon basin. Circumstance. Vector, resilient, scientific, communal commentators called it deferred courage. Children taped her adjectives to their walls, because that's what the registry did. It turned adjectives into acts, and acts into new kinds of ancestors. In Tunis, Amina folded her confirmation and placed it beneath the Quran on her shelf. She felt lighter, not because she had avoided death, but because she had chosen her debt to arrival. Later that week, at a family video call, she told Sana. The screen froze and unfroze on her granddaughter's face, mid-laugh. "Then I'll be waiting," Sana said, half joking, half vowing. They discussed years as if they were streets to meet on, corners to turn at, landmarks to use when the map gets foggy. No miracles, just a plan, The book of nexts kept filling. Markets, like rivers, reroute when the terrain shifts. With one return guaranteed, new industries flowered along the banks of inevitability. There were honest gardens and shadow marshes. On the light side, continuity counselors, ethicists with actuarial spreadsheets and a bedside manner, helped families integrate the one return into meaningful life narratives. They asked unexpected questions. What unfinished conversation do you want your second life to start with? What kind of problem do you want to inherit? People began to treat their second life as a gift you give your successors, not a prize you give yourself. Universities offered legacy labs, where students prototyped policies, charities, or artistic movements that they would pass forward to their future selves, or to future strangers, by specifying return vectors that aimed them at those projects downstream. On the dark side, slot brokers, illegal and everywhere. They claimed they could steer your echo to a specific house with the right rituals, or for the right fee. They could not. Physics resisted bribes. But people paid anyway, because love makes us believe in exactness. Police busted underground chrono midwives, who drugged dying clients into scribbling illegal amendments, narrowing their adjective vectors to unlawful specificity. Judges threw those amendments out in court. Still, the same impulse drove a black market in prenatal detection tech. Expectant parents hired data consultancies to estimate whether a fetus was a first or a returner. It was pseudoscience spackled with machine learning. The continuity agency outlawed the diagnostics. Ethics boards condemned them. But in quiet rooms, fear writes checks. Not everything needed policing to be complicated. Romance became a math of tickets. Dating apps added a toggle. Spent/unspent/undisclosed. Entire aesthetics emerged. Some found spent deeply attractive, evidence of someone committed to fully dying once and therefore to fully living now. Others sought unspent, craving partners who might someday choose to return near their grandchildren. Prenups added new paragraphs. In the event of terminal illness, we will consult a continuity counselor and not act within 72 hours of new grief. Late-night talk shows joked that ghosting meant something very different now. The jokes turned into rituals. People lit a second candle on birthdays, a small loop of wax, to honor the untaken path. The one-timer ethic was born in the middle of all this. It began with an essay by a firefighter-turned-philosopher named Diego Salazar. He had pulled 5 people from a burning apartment in Denver when a stairwell collapsed and the ceiling came down like a judgment. Trapped, struggling to breathe, he recorded a voice memo to his sister in case he did not make it. He did make it. Weeks later, with skin grafts shining like new maps, he wrote, "The dignity of the last door." It argued that the one return should not cheapen courage. It should purify it. "Do not save me because I can come back. Save me because this life is good enough to defend for its own sake," he wrote. "And if I die, do not assume I will return near you. Assume I will return near what the world most needs, because love does not only look backward." The essay spread across continents. It was read at graduations and funerals. "One-time courage," people said, meaning courage without a safety net, even if a safety net existed. Diego had not spent his ticket. He set his window a century out. Yet moral hazards weren't theoretical. Assault statistics dipped, then shifted. Some aggressors took reckless risks, thinking, "I can always come back." Courts responded by adding sentencing enhancements for crimes committed under rebirth recklessness. The message was simple. Second life is not a coupon for your first. Emergency rooms put up posters. One return does not mean one more try tonight. Drunk driving fatalities fell anyway, slowly, as a generational ethic took hold. People learned to imagine their second life as a reward they couldn't stomach staining. Even war could not ignore the new physics of meaning. Recruitment ads softened their edge, emphasizing humanitarian missions and disaster relief. Platoons adopted ticket buddies, a pairing of a spent with an unspent soldier for mutual accountability. In one widely studied incident, a commander in Eritrea prevented a retaliatory strike because half his team had declared near-term returns. "We're not going to spend their second lives for an angry hour," he said to a journalist, and the recording became a training module around the world. Meanwhile, families discovered the intimacy of planning far beyond themselves. On a rainy Thursday in Marseille, Sana, now a pediatrician, sat with her mother drafting her own registry entry. Return window, 2100 to 2120. Geographic arc, Mediterranean. Circumstance. Vector, collaborative, literate, just. She laughed at literate, but kept it. They attached a note to the digital file. "If my grandmother returns within these years, tell the child this story." It was not a binding clause. The agency would never allow it. But the note did not ask the universe to bend. It asked humans to remember. Then came a scandal that threatened to collapse trust. A biotech startup released a headset claiming to allow pre-visualization of probable return lanes in the last minutes of life, creating addictive little movies that looked true but were nothing more than probabilistic mirages. Hospitals in Singapore and Johannesburg reported patients demanding last-second revisions to their registry entries based on what the headset showed, narrowing their adjective vectors into illegal specificity. The continuity agency raided the company, seized the servers, and held a global press conference. "We do not show the dying a fantasy of control," the director said. "We show them the dignity of choice." People cried in waiting rooms when they heard that line. Nurses printed it on lanyards. In Denver, Diego completed a different kind of ending. He married his boyfriend in a ceremony inside a decommissioned firehouse. On the wall above their vows hung an old helmet with the number 14 and a small brass plaque. Spent or unspent. Love's not counting. After the ceremony, he recorded a second voice memo to his sister. "If I go," he said, "tell them I set my return for as far as I can throw it. And tell them to spend nothing out of fear." And in Tunis, Amina's breath began to shorten. Her body hardened into the kind of slowness you don't notice, until stairs turn into mountains. She wrote letters. She practiced letting the room grow quiet as a rehearsal. When Sana visited, they didn't speak about death so much as about doors, how to hold them for strangers, how to step through without rushing. "If I return near you," Amina said, "treat me like a neighbor, not a project." Sana smiled at the admonition. "Deal," she said, and meant it. The first border crisis triggered by second births wasn't about bodies crossing lines, it was about intentions. In the year 2087, a cluster of people in Southeast Asia coordinated their return windows to between 2090 and 2095, with circumstance vector, insurgent, reformist, educated. They were dissidents from a petrostate racked by floods and corruption. Their plan was simple as a seed: die older, return young, and grow an opposition that would be native by birth and patient by design. The state denounced it as demographic sabotage and passed the Purity of Origin Act, which claimed to invalidate citizenship for all Second Life returns not certified as domestic. It was performative rage. The Continuity Agency issued a blistering opinion. Intention cannot be titled to a flag. International courts agreed. The dissidents returned. And 25 years later, climate policy in that country shifted in a way that felt both miraculous and boring, like finally fixing a pipe. This was the geopolitics of the one return, strategy at the scale of lullabies. But politics is only half the story. The other half is personal, and it pivots on someone like Mira Volkov, a systems engineer in Tallinn who never liked drama, but lived next to it anyway. Her country had survived cyber war after cyber war, and Mira built intrusion detection for a living, catching the ghosts of future damage in the act. When she was 46, her wife, Kaya, was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer that did not care about registry entries or probabilities. They fought every way two stubborn people can fight. The tumor wrote its own schedule. In the hospice window, the Baltic sky performed its pale theater, and Kaya slept. Mira faced the registry alone, in a small white office with a notary who looked like kindness wearing glasses. She could push her return forward, seeking a life inside the cheerful futurism of Tallinn's tech scene. Stable, democratic, efficient. Or she could aim her echo where the systems were failing hardest. She remembered a blackout in Lagos that had cascaded into a hospital crisis a decade earlier. She reread Diego's essay. She read it out loud. Then she whispered, "I want to arrive where the world cannot afford my silence." She set Return Window 2098 to 2118. Geographic Arc, West Africa. Circumstance Vector, Infrastructural, Cooperative, Reformist. The notary blinked. "You'll be far from your family," she said, not as a warning, but as a thread to pull. "I'll be near my family's future," Mira answered. She signed. She called Kaya's sister. She cried in the hallway, where crying echoes safely. And she went back to the hospice to practice the craft that everyone must learn once. Leaving. Outside of such quiet rooms, the world wrestled with return flows. Some countries, fearful of demographic flooding, set anchor laws requiring their citizens to choose return arcs that included home territory for at least one window. The agency challenged these. Some were struck down. Others were softened into encouragements with tax incentives. Universities, sensing a civilizational opportunity, created return praxis degrees, part anthropology, part engineering, part diplomacy. Whole cohorts trained to greet Second Lifers, to build schools that assume layered memories, to craft public health messaging that honored ancestors sitting in toddlers' chairs, to teach civics to citizens who had chosen the place before the place chose them. And then there were the mistakes, because choice turns out to be a blunt instrument when wielded by grief. One city saw a spike in near-term returns labeled vengeful, vigilant, decisive. Vigilantism rose. The courts cracked down. Continuity counselors launched campaigns, raw and honest, on late-night TV and bus stops. Don't spend out of rage. Even the algorithm, the swivel-eyed god of social feeds, tilted toward caution. A new class of influencers emerged, one-timer guides, storytellers who specialized in narrating Second Life choices that saved communities rather than satisfying vendettas. Their most-watched episode featured a woman who planned to return to the neighborhood where her brother died, then changed her vector to mediating, entrepreneurial, interfaith, creating a social enterprise 30 years later that lowered homicide by giving teenagers reasons to delay all their doors. Amina did not live to see any of these episodes. She died in a quiet room with Sana holding her hand, while the city's call to prayer braided with the sea breeze outside. The echo registered. The nurse nodded. Funny, the new gestures humanity had learned. and Sana kissed her grandmother's forehead. That night, Sana opened the digital vault and read the adjective vector again, as if it were a poem. Stable, equitable, intergenerational. She did not know if the universe would be precise. She did not demand it. She wrote a letter to a stranger in the future, perhaps her grandmother, perhaps not, and placed it in an envelope labeled, "For the child who feels older than she looks." Decades turned. Coral reefs rebuilt themselves where policy and patience aligned. In West African cities, microgrids sprouted like constellations. In one school courtyard in Dakar, a teacher explained to a class of 7-year-olds that some of them might be returns, and that this was neither magic nor mandate. "It means," she said, "that time is a long family." A little girl with watchful eyes sat in the front row, humming a tune she could not name. She liked to help adults carry chairs. She asked to hold babies at weddings. When she spoke, elders leaned in as if answering a question they had been waiting to hear. Her name was Amin. She wore a bracelet, her guardian said, came from an old woman who had left a letter at a clinic before Amin was born. On the other side of the continent, in Lagos, a young systems engineer named Zainab graduated top of her class and joined a team tasked with hardening hospital power grids against blackouts. She had always loved patience machines, devices that kept time and life steady. During onboarding, a mentor asked the new hires to share not their dream job, but their return ethic. Zainab said, "I want to be the person who makes tragedies boring." They laughed, then understood. She wrote 3 adjectives on the whiteboard: infrastructural, cooperative, reformist. At a conference in Accra 5 years later, Zainab presented a model that predicted failure cascades with startling accuracy. A tall visitor with silver hair waited after the talk, smiling as if she had just met a punchline to a long joke. "I'm here to fund you," the visitor said, and handed Zainab a card. On it, Volkov Systems, Resilience Lab. The visitor's first name was Mira. The human mind loves coincidences too much to be trusted with them, and yet patterns are how we survive. The world did not need to know whether Mira had arrived in the same city she had chosen, or whether the universe had simply braided 2 intentions on the smallest hook. What mattered was that return had rewritten ambition into stewardship. Zainab's grid upgrades rolled out to dozens of hospitals. Ambulance sirens sang less often. Nurses finished shifts with more patients alive. Babies slept under humming fans that did not falter. And in a seaside neighborhood in Tunis, a pediatrician named Sana kept a box of letters in her clinic's safe. Parents sometimes brought in children who watched elders with a gravity too large for their bodies. Sana would, on rare days when it felt right, open the box and read a paragraph aloud. Not to confirm reincarnation, not to map souls, to remind families that even if the universe cannot promise us each other, we can promise each other the universe we intend. This is how borders soften. Not at the checkpoint, but in the crib. One return changes everything because it changes what we think a life is for. If there were endless cycles, we might drift into moral procrastination. There's always another time to be brave, another time to be kind. If there were none, we might shrink into urgency's narrow tunnel. Too little time to build cathedrals of public good. But with one return, a rare and deliberate second comma in the sentence, we learn to write longer thoughts. Politicians learned to legislate for grandchildren they might meet as neighbors. Engineers learned to design for systems they might inherit from themselves. Lovers learned to prefer promises that lasted not because they were eternal, but because they were chosen twice. The registry, for all its bureaucracy, was a school of intention. Entire generations became fluent in a new grammar. Adjectives as vows, windows as patience, arcs as empathy. Abuse existed, as it always does, rage misdirected, desire narrowed into demand. But cultures built immunities the way bodies do, by telling better stories than the grifters, by making quiet heroism fashionable. Amina's adjectives lived on in a bracelet, in a clinic, in the way Sana greeted new parents with the softness of a person who had rehearsed both hellos and goodbyes. Diego's essay outlived his bones and his badge, often read by recruits before their first fire and by elders before their last breath. Mira's choice, whether literal return or symbolic succession, proved that the most radical activism might be a well-specified hope for a place you might never see. And what of fear? The old fear that death will make our love meaningless? In this world, fear lost a little market share. Not because we defeated it with data, but because we practiced the courage of delayed arrival. We gave our best to the present, and our adjectives to the future. And somewhere in that exchange, dignity learned a new trick. One return is neither a loophole nor a loophole closed. It is a mirror we hold to ourselves. It asks, if you could gift your future neighbors a version of you, what would that child be invited to care about? Choose that. Live now as if you trust that choice. And when the room grows quiet and the signal leaves the brain, let it go where patience points. The world will feel your hand at the door, not as a ghost, but as a welcome. The turnstile clicks, not a door slammed. A promise kept. What would your 3 adjectives be? And why? Would you use your one return soon, or throw it far into the future? Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and like.